Hey, this is Ralph, and in this next series of videos I want to go over using Design View and Access to create some queries. And there's a few different kinds I want to check out, particularly text fields, number currency fields, using wildcards as part of a search, using average, sum, count, which are called aggregates, for some data, and also making some calculated queries, which I think some people find to be one of the trickier styles. But first, let me just give you kind of an overview of what we're going to be working on. So I've got a database here, and it's got 4 tables: clients, employees, jobs log, and tasks. And if I jump over to Database Tools, Relationships, you'll kind of see how these tables are connected to each other. This company has quite a few employees, I think about 300 listed employees, and there's also a number of tasks, things like networking, programming, graphic design, various tasks. There's a number of clients. From time to time, an employee will be sent out on a job assignment. So that's a job assignment gets recorded into the jobs log. It involves a particular employee doing a particular task for a particular client. And of course, they record the date that occurs and the time they started and the time they finished. And that makes up the jobs log. So just so we can kind of see how this looks, I've got a table of data of employees, their ID, their name, their billing rate, what they charge what the client gets charged, and the employee's pay. I have a table of clients, and really all I have on here are some client names. I don't have other data like phone numbers or addresses. There's only a few tasks, different kinds of tasks that an employee might do for a particular job assignment. And then of course I got the big jobs log. The jobs log has about 1,100 records in it, just from a limited period of time between January and May. And this of course keeps track of multiple, an employee working for a particular client doing a particular task from a starting time to an ending time. So I'd like to run some queries based on this data. So I'm going to go ahead and close. Oops, didn't mean to close this again. I'm not going to save any changes. I just made some of the columns wider. So this is the table that I'm working with that I want to get some information about. I'm going to go ahead and close this relationship window. So that's what we're going to be working on. And the first thing I'd like to work on are text fields. So text field, you know what it is. It could be obviously a first name, last name, address. It could also be something like an ID number. Many ID numbers are actually text fields, even though they may look like numbers. I'm going to jump over to the Create ribbon and then over to Query Design. And in Query Design, I don't need my property sheet. Well, let me do this first. I've got a Show Table dialog box. I'm going to go ahead and close this for a moment. I'll come right back to it. Close my property sheet, and then I want that Show Table dialog box again. So I'm going to click the Show Table button so I can see the tables that I can search for. Fight the temptation to display all tables. Okay, so you don't want to just double click and display all the tables available to you, because if you use a table that's not part of your query, it will affect your results, usually in a negative way. You're not going to get what you want. So I'm going to start off really simple, and I'll just click and delete tables that I don't want. Okay, so now I have just my employees table, and then I can decide what fields I want to be part of my design grid. My design grid is here in the lower portion of the screen, the design window. I'm going to go ahead and display the employee ID, the employee's first name, the employee's last name, and the employee's pay rate. Now I'm focusing on text fields, so I could look at employee ID, first name, and last name. And if I run this query right now, it's a fine query. There's just no criteria limiting the results. I'm going to get a record for every single employee. So if I run this query, and I can see at the bottom I've got 300 records and there's 300 employees, so they're all there. And I can check all this information. I see, for instance, that at least one of my employees' first name is Bruce. So if I go back to Design View and I go to the Employee First Name column here in my design grid, I'm at the criteria cell. I can actually type in Bruce. And as soon as I tab away, Access is going to put little quotation marks around that because I'm literally looking for this particular text string. Now if I rerun this query, I only get the results where Bruce is in the first name. Let's try something a little bit different. Last name Armstrong. So instead of looking for a first name of Bruce, I'm going to look for a last name of Armstrong. I'll run that. There we go. I'm getting those same results. Let me go back to Design View, delete that, rerun. Now I'm just going to do a quick sort here by last name, and I'm just looking for a common last name. There we go. So I've got 2 employees with Acosta. So I'm going to go back to Design View, and for last name I'll search for Acosta. Access puts the quotes in for me. You could have typed them in yourself though. And I'll run that, and I get my 2 records that meet that particular text criteria. Now, my employee ID is also a text field, so I could work with that, but I'd still have to know the exact, because I know no 2 employees have the exact same employee ID. So you'd have to type in exactly what the employee ID is. But that's using a text field. Now, the other kind of query I'd like to look at is using number and currency fields. So let's check those out. I'm going to go ahead and delete my criteria for this text field of last name, and I'm going to focus on employee pay rate. This is a currency field, but it can be treated just like a number. Numbers and text are just a little bit different. I won't use quotation marks here, but instead you can use a lot of comparison operators. For instance, if I just run my query right now, I get my 300 records, and I get all the employees listed and their pay rates. And I see they're all kind of in the double digits here. It looks like between roughly 12, and I see some up around 30 and things like that. So back into Design View, I'm going to type in greater than 20. And this is going to give me records for all employees where their pay rate is greater than $20 per hour. So I can go ahead and run this now. And out of my 300 records, I have 178 results. So 178 of these employees have an employee pay rate greater than 20. Go back to Design View, and I'll change this now to greater than 28. This should be pretty limited. I'll go ahead and rerun this, and I've got down to 45 employees. Back to Design View, greater than 30. Rerun it. There we go. So now I've only got 7 employees with a pay rate greater than 30. Back to Design View. You can also kind of combine these. What if I'm looking for a specific range? I'm looking for employees that are between 25 and 30. I could do greater than 25 and write out the word and less than 30. And go ahead and run that. So now I've got 89 employees that match that criteria. By the way, this doesn't include any employees that were exactly at 25. I am greater than 25. You could do greater than or equal to 25 and less than equal to 30. And if I run this, I'm actually getting 90 employees. So there's a few extras involved. There's another way we can write this too. Access has a nice little, I tend to do with this technique, but there's also another way. We could do between 25 and 30. You actually write it out with the words between the lower limit and the upper limit. And if I run this, I'm getting my 90 results. Now when you do the between option, that's the same as saying greater than and equal to, or greater than or equal to and less than or equal to. So the equal is included there. So between 25 and 30 would include the 25 and it'll include the 30. Whereas if I do greater than 25 and less than 30, this does not include the 25 and does not include the 30. So just keep that in mind when you're doing these number criteria. Now the next one I want to check out are pattern match or wildcards, and I'm going to do these with text fields. So pattern match wildcards. Let's jump back over to the database. I'll go ahead and delete this number criteria. And let's say I'm looking for an employee whose last name begins with the letter A. I can just type in a letter A and an asterisk, and as soon as I press my tab key, Access will put it the like operator word, and it puts quotation marks around my A asterisk. So this is going to return all employees that have a last name that begin with the letter A. So if I run this, there we go. Ayala to Atkins. So these are my employees with the letter A for the last name. So that's using that kind of criteria. Their employee ID also is based off the first letter of their employee's last name, so I could also use that as a criteria with a parameter, with a wildcard. I could do employee ID B asterisk, and as soon as I press my tab key and then run this, I'll get all employees with the last name of the letter B. Employee ID is a text field, so I can use that in the exact same way. So I can use this particular wildcard, B asterisk. And there's a couple wildcards you might use. There's the asterisk, but there's also a question mark. An asterisk represents any number of characters. For instance, let me go back to my employee's last name, and I'll do another search. I'll spell out like, quotation, C asterisk quotation. And let me run this. So now I'm getting 28 employees. So 28 of my 300 employees have a last name that begins with the letter C. And I don't know how many letters, but I know it begins with the letter C. And we'll have short names like Craig and Clark, and then we have longer names like Christensen. You could also use a question mark. Let's try this. Maybe not as realistic, but let's give it a shot. I'm going to put in C, question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. And then I'll press my tab key. Now I'm being very specific. I'm looking for an employee whose last name is exactly 5 letters. The first letter is a C. If I run this, I get 5 employees met that criteria. So I've got 5 employees with a last name begins with the letter C and only 5 characters. The question mark lets us know that I'm looking for one specific character. Let's see if I have any 4-letter names. Run this again. No results. So I don't have any employees whose name begins with the letter C and is only 4 letters. So that's using criteria, or I'm sorry, using wildcards for pattern match criteria. The next one I want to look at are aggregate queries, and this is where you might want to do some averages or sums, and this is going to involve a slightly different technique in our design view. So let's jump back over here, and I'll go ahead and delete my criteria for last name. Now I'm going to be curious. Let's see. I don't have a good grouping criteria in this table. I want to do an average based on some common denominator. So I think what I will do is I'm going to change my tables out to my job logs. I'm going to go ahead and delete. By the way, I'm just clicking right up here, getting my down arrows to select. And then I'll just delete all of that. I'm going to delete my employees table. Click my Show Table dialog box, and I'm going to bring in the jobs log, and then I'll close this. For my jobs log table, I'll go ahead and bring in the task ID, and then let's go ahead and bring in, don't really have a good field here too. Alright, I think I'm going to bring in 2 tables for this one. I'm going to bring my Show Tables box again, and I'll go ahead and do employees, close. So now I'm going to be using 2 tables. I'm going to use the task ID from my jobs log table and the employee pay rate from the employees table. Now, keep up with me here. I've got two fields. One field from one table, another field from another table. Now, I picked these kind of intentionally. I wanted to have a field that had a limited number of possibilities. My tasks, I only have about 5 possible tasks: networking, graphic design, web development, that kind of stuff. So I wanted something that I could easily group by, and I also wanted a numeric or currency field that I could easily average or total. And I think I've got this going here. So I'm using two tables, and I've got them both in the design grid. Before I do anything else, let's run it and just see what the results look like. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And I'm getting a bunch of task names, and I'm getting employee pay rates. Okay, I can handle that. Let's jump back to the design view and make a couple small changes. Now watch this. I'm going to click my totals row. This is in the design ribbon for a query. I'm going to click that totals row, and down here on my design grid it adds the totals row and it defaults to group by. I'm going to leave the word group by for the task ID, but I'm going to change the employee pay rate to average. I now want to know the average employee pay rate for each particular task. Now watch what happens when I rerun this query. Okay, so I can see for web development the average pay rate is $21.09. For programming, the average pay rate is $22.07, and these are based on the tasks done in the various jobs from January to May. Let me come back to design view. Not really a good reason to do it, but instead of average I could also do sum. This isn't going to have meaningful results. So this is 4,618, but remember this isn't based on the jobs. So if I really wanted to sum something of interest, that would be to keep track of perhaps total hours that were worked, or with total pay that was generated. That would be an interesting thing to sum. The last one I want to look at here are calculated queries. Okay, so calculated queries are going to involve you typing out some formula, sometimes simple, sometimes complex, to make some new information. Let me jump back over to Access. And I will go ahead and I'm just going to delete what I've got here. And I think I'll focus on the jobs log. So I'm going to delete my employees table from the design window, and I have only my jobs log table. So I'm going to start off by bringing in the job ID, the job date, the start time, and the end time. Now start time and end time are really date time fields. They're actually times of the day. So if I were to run this right now, oh, by the way, I need to turn off my totals row. Since I'm not doing any aggregate data at the moment, I'm going to turn my totals row off. My focus now is on a calculation. Let me go and run this, and of course I'm going to get a record for every job recorded, and there's a little over, it's a 1,105, so 1105. Got a lot of records. Each job has its unique ID, each one has a date, each one has a start time and an end time. I want to know how many hours from the start to the end. So I'm going to jump back over to design view, and I'm going to create what's called a calculated field, or to create a calculated query. I'm going to create a brand new field over here in my next blank column, and to make this easy for me and for you, I'll go ahead and right click on this and I'll zoom in so I get a bigger working area, and I can make the font a little bit bigger. Okay, so when you're writing a calculation, the first thing you do is you write in the field name that you want. And you just make up a field name. I'm going to call this time in hours, colon. Okay, so I put in my new field name and then a colon. And then after the colon, I type in a calculation. All right, now the calculation is usually going to involve some kind of formula. And the first one I'm going to do is actually going to be a little bit more complex because I'm going to use a built-in function that Access has. And then I'll do a simpler one as my second example. So my first one, I'm going to use a function called dateDiff. Okay, so a function in Access is very similar to a function in Excel. This particular function has some required parameters, and there's 3 parameters I'm going to put in. The first one is a code that represents the unit of time that I want in quotes. This is going to give me minutes. It's going to give me the number of minutes in between a start time and an end time. The next parameter is my starting time, and I'm going to put this in square brackets, and this is going to be my job start time. Now remember, my job start time is simply one of the fields that I'm referring to. Job start time is an existing field. Whenever you refer to an existing field, you put it in square brackets. comma, and then I'm going to refer to my job end time, square brackets. So this is a function, and the name of this new field is going to be time in hours, and I'm using the date diff function to give me the minutes between the job start time and the job end time. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to run this again. Now I can see that, for instance, for this one job here on May 15th, it started at 9:20, went to 4:50 p.m. There was 450 minutes. That's not as easy for me to work with, so let me jump back over here. I'm going to right-click, zoom in again on my result, and I'm going to divide this result by 60. So I'm going to divide the number of minutes by 60. This will give me the number of hours. I'll click OK, rerun this. Now I can see that for that first job, 7.5 hours. For this job on April 10th, 11:20 a.m. to 1:50 p.m., 2.5 hours. Now some of these, I've got these pound signs here. It's just because I've got so many decimal places, it was hiding the number, so I can fix that also. Back in Design View, I can right-click on this and go to Properties. I'll format this number as fixed, and then I will show 2 decimal places. Close my property sheet, rerun the query, and there we go. So now I've got a simpler kind of look. So there's a job that was 11.5 hours, and there's some that are shorter. There's 4 hours. Now that I have this new numeric field, though, it's kind of nice, because now I can look for all jobs that were greater than 10 hours just by putting in my number criteria, greater than 10. When I rerun this, I see that out of those 1,100 jobs, there was 114 of them that were greater than 10 hours. Interesting. Let me go back and put greater than 12. Rerun that. There were 13 jobs that were greater than 12 hours. So that's a calculated field. I want to do another one, though. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of these. And I'll delete that table. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up my Show Table dialog box, and I'll display my Employees table. And I'll click Close. I'll bring in the employee's ID, the employee's first name, the employee's last name, and the employee's pay rate. I'm going to calculate a new field, which is going to be, this is going to be a simple one. This is a holiday bonus, which is going to be some multiple of their pay rate. If I run the query right now, I see that I've got my 300 employees listed, and I see their pay rates right there. Jump back to Design View. I'm going to right-click on the next blank field, and I'll zoom in. And I'm going to create a new field called Holiday Bonus. Their holiday bonus is going to be very simple. It's going to be their employee pay rate times 10. Okay, once again, whenever you refer to an existing field, you're going to enclose it in square brackets. So this is a simple one. I'm taking an existing field, which I already know is a number or a currency. I'm multiplying it by 10. I'll click OK. When I rerun this query, I now have a holiday bonus field in the results, and I can see exactly that same things seem to be working. I can do the math in my head to see that, okay, I'm clearly getting accurate results. So that's a really simple calculated query.